9 regulator members who take collective decisions, 5 part-time and 4 full-time members supported by the personnel of NERSA. I will be chairing this public hearing, and I would like to introduce the other members of the panel who are also members of the Petroleum Pipelines subcommittee. They also are members of various other committees of the energy regulator and chair also some of these committees and subcommittees. I will start off with Madam Zandile Mpungose, who's a part-time regulator member and is the deputy chairperson of NERSA. Over to Madam Mpungose, if you may just greet.
Good morning, everyone in attendance. My name is Zandile Mpungose. Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to apologize to those on the call and the public. The cameras seem not to be working on my side and proceeding in this mode. I would then also proceed to introduce Madam Nomalanga Stole, Advocate Stole, who is the Chief Executive Officer of NERSA and member of this committee. Madam CEO.
Good morning, Chairperson, members, and everyone who have joined us for this public hearing this morning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Also would like to introduce Madam Nomfundo Maseti, who's a full-time regulator member, primarily responsible for pipe gas regulation, and also currently assisting as a full-time regulator member, primarily responsible for electricity regulation. She's a member of this committee. Madam Maseti.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to the members and everyone on the call, and good morning to the stakeholders that have joined this platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Maseti. I also have got the gentleman here, Mr. Fungai Sibanda, who's a part-time regulator member and also a member of this committee. Wanda, sir.
Good morning, Chair, NERSA colleagues, and all participants in this hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This public hearing was duly advertised in the following newspapers: the Mercury, Cape Times, Bild, Isolezwe, and the Star. It was also posted on our website, and it is held in accordance with the Energy Regulator Act, in which affected parties are given an opportunity to submit their views and present the relevant facts and evidence to the energy regulator. This hearing is governed by the NERSA rules on public hearings, which can be summarized as follows. 1, all parties will be required to make their presentations under oath. 2, presenters will be afforded 15 minutes. I will grant a leniency up to a maximum of 20 minutes each. Only members of the panel may ask questions to the presenters. However, members of the public may forward their questions to Patience Maswanganye, who is the secretary of this committee. We also gonna post it on the chat so to make it easy for those who want to their questions. And the panel will then decide on how to deal with those questions. Should the presenters wish to present information they consider confidential, the panel will make a ruling on whether to close the hearing or to have the information submitted in writing. The recording of this hearing will be done through our recording system and will also be a live audio streaming on NERSA's X page, previously known as Twitter, as well it's at NERSA_ZA. This will be the official record of this meeting. The house rules for this meeting are as follows. Please switch your cell phones to silent mode. Please ensure that your mic and video are switched off at all times unless you are making a presentation. Please use the chat responsibly to contribute to a meaningful discussion through the public hearing sessions. We have the following 3 presenters for today's public hearing, and each presenter will be given the 15 minutes to a maximum of 20 minutes to present. I have Dr. Rod Crompton. Also I've got in his personal capacity. I also got Mr. Tembani Mazibugo, who's from VOPEC Terminal Durban Pichwa Ltd. And I've got the Rudy Histerman, who's the head regulation markets from Sasol. I note that he's also accompanied by other team members, including Madam Barbara Mtongan. I would then like to then proceed to swear the people in, noting that I would only ensure that we swear in whoever then is going to be participating. If you are going to be participating as a team, you will present for the time given, and then afterwards you will have to have your pen and paper ready to take notes of the questions that will be raised thereafter. I will start off with Dr. Crompton, Mazibugo, and followed by Histerman, in that order. I would just like ICT to assist me with the activation of the cameras in this instance. I see a hand raised from Madam Maseti.
It's sorted, Chairperson. I wanted you to just check with the IT people if we are live, because the number of people that were showing were less, but it seems now they're fine. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I was asking for the ICT people to assist with the activation of the camera for the swearing in, especially.
Chair, let me ask IT to help from my side.
Teams needs permission to access your device. Go to your privacy setting to allow it, then leave and rejoin the meeting. I think I'll have to proceed so long in the interest of time. Yes, it's suboptimal, but one should make do with what one has at this juncture. Without much ado, I would like
For the record, Chairperson, we have to at least have them show their faces, Chair, especially if you are going to administer the oath. It is important, Chairperson. I think the team should have checked these things beforehand, not to have them during the session. If we can stand down, Chairperson, for 2 minutes to allow for that. I'm sorry, Chair. Thanks.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we're good to go. I would just like to take this opportunity then to get Dr. Rod Crompton to present. Dr. Crompton?
Good morning, Chairperson and members of the panel. My camera is on. I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it. Thank you. Are you having to have any concerns taking an oath?
No.
Okay. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, company, organization, and designation therein.
Roderick Crompton. I'm here in my personal capacity.
Thank you. You've got your 15 minutes with a desktop time of 20 minutes. Over to you, sir.
Chairperson, before I begin, I want to present and share my screen Can I turn my camera off while I'm doing that? Because I've seen sometimes the picture of the person presenting obscures the slides.
You're at liberty to do that, sir.
Thank you. Please tell me when you can see.
Well, I can see your screen,
slide.
but please just put it on presentation mode.
It should be on presentation mode now.
Yes, then you may proceed, sir.
Thank you. So I've made a long submission in this regard, approximately 43 pages. So I would appeal to members of the panel to read it. 10 minutes is not enough. I know it's been increased since I did the presentation for submission to NERSA a few days ago to 15 minutes, but this is a very serious matter. It's the first time since I left NERSA 9 years ago that I have decided to present at a public hearing, and I mention that as evidence of the gravity of this decision which is before you and how important it is. My evidence is based on my personal experience, which covers more than 40 years in the industry. I won't go through it all, but my PhD dealt with various aspects of liquid fuels and petrochemicals and SASL. I was co-convener of the National Economic Forum Liquid Fuels Industry Task Force in the run-up to democracy and shortly after the advent of democracy. That subsequently got renamed to NEDLAC. I was also the MD of the Minerals and Energy Policy Centre, which did most of the work on the White Paper on Energy Policy of 1998. I worked at the Department of Minerals and Energy, as it was then, as Chief Director and Deputy Director General, where I regulated Petronet, as it was then, now Transnet Pipelines, amongst many other duties. I drafted amendments to the Petroleum Products Act, the Petroleum Pipelines Bill and the NERSA Bill, and I ushered them through Parliament in all the hearings. I chaired the interdepartmental task team responsible for the restructuring of Petronet, and I've served on the boards of Mosgas, Sucor, PetroSA, Central Energy Fund, EGAS, and Eskom. And I've done considerable research in liquid fuels and related matters. So all of this has informed my evidence. So my initial impressions of this discussion document, which NERSA published, was the question, is there regulatory capture here? If you look at the omissions, the errors, the bias in the document, that question comes to mind. The second important impression is that, is NATREF seeking to hold South Africa to ransom? It in effect is saying that, if NERSA doesn't capitulate to their demands, then they are going to close that refinery. And we've seen this kind of threat and attempts to hold South Africa to ransom by other oil companies before in history, and some of you will know about that. I can go into detail if you want. But that's a question that arises out of NATREF's stance. And when I use NATREF in this presentation, I'm referring to its shareholders, which obviously include SASL. So those are the initial impressions. One of the most important omissions from the discussion document is who's the big beneficiary of this proposed change to the tariff methodology. And the big beneficiary is SASL Secunda. So is it fair for NERSA to gift SASL Secunda a perpetual windfall gain for doing nothing, without lifting a finger, to earn millions of rands because of a NERSA decision, when there are better ways to subsidize NATREF, if indeed NATREF needs or warrants a subsidy? And if the multi-products pipeline tariff is increased, then Secunda gets that gift of that increase on all volumes it produces. Secunda is much larger than NATREF, approximately 38% in terms of nameplate capacity. So a 5 cents a litre increase in the MPP gifts SASL Secunda approximately 226 million per annum in perpetuity for doing nothing. That gift, so-called, will be paid for by motorists. And I submit to you that's not in the public interest. Secunda doesn't even use the crude oil pipeline. And this, for context, comes on top of a 71% increase in real terms, inflation removed, in the Gauteng petrol price zone differential between 2013 and 2025. 71% real increase. I mean, that's an investor's dream. So my appeal to NERSA is you should avoid regulatory failure on an unprecedented scale by doing what NATREF wants. And as you probably all know, Sasol is a major shareholder in NATREF. There's a fundamental confusion in the discussion document, which I want to go into. In 1967, the government, not NERSA, the government gave NATREF a subsidy to move its refinery from the coast to Sasolburg. And in my submission, I've set out all of the detailed correspondence that relates to that. That policy decision has nothing to do with the proper regulation of the petroleum pipelines by NERSA in 2025. That was some 50 odd years ago. It has no role in what NERSA should be doing today. So the legal position is that subsidies for industrial policy purposes are a government policy matter, and those are outside of the Petroleum Pipelines Act, outside of the NERSA Act, and outside of NERSA's remit. So NERSA should not be involved in these kind of decisions. NERSA's own legal opinion is that there's no legal basis to include a, quote, NATREF neutrality principle, unquote, which is just a euphemism for the subsidy NATREF is seeking in the tariff set. Section 21F of the Petroleum Pipelines Act allows for sufficient crude oil for NATREF whilst it remains a going concern. That is the only legal protection for NATREF. I was in Parliament when the Petroleum Pipelines Bill served for discussion in Parliament. This section was discussed extensively, and it was quite clear that Parliament did not intend the Act to be used to subsidise apartheid-era industrial policy decisions. But for a concession to security of supply, they decided that crude oil, there should be sufficient capacity for crude oil to continue to supply NATREF so long as it was a going concern. And in that going concern wording, it recognises that refineries have a finite life. They don't last forever, and they are not always profitable. So that was the recognition that Parliament made. The Act does not say that NERSA must or even may manipulate pipeline tariffs to keep NATREF a going concern. That is outside the legal provisions of the Act. There's a big confusion in the discussion document between policy and administrative instruments. So if you know your history, the time that NATREF was shifted from the coast to Sasolburg was when the apartheid regime was building a petrochemicals hub in Sasolburg. They had already built Sasol 1, the huge ASI Centrochem complex plant was being established there. They had built a naphtha cracker there, and there were feedstock issues feeding that getting naphtha for that naphtha cracker to make petrochemicals. And moving NATREF from the coast to Sasolburg fitted in well with the industrial policy that was being pursued at the time, which was to establish this fuels and petrochemicals hub in Sasolburg. So that was a policy decision to have an inland refinery, and it did that for the linkages I've just explained. Total, who was one of the original shareholders of NATREF, said that there was government insistence to have NATREF constructed inland. And in my submission, you'll find the details to these references, which I don't have time to go into here. So the second element that gets conflated in NERSA's policy discussion document is what was the administrative instrument or tool that should be used to deliver the subsidy to NATREF. So after you've made a policy decision as a government, you then need to decide, okay, what instrument, what tool will we use to give effect to this policy decision? And for some time, pipelines were used. At other times, it was a pure government handout. So according to evidence Total has submitted, you can see there at the bottom of the slide the different tariff regimes that were used to subsidize Tariff. I point out in particular that between 1981 and 1987, crude oil was transported free of charge to Tariff. Clear evidence that this was a subsidy funded by government and intended as such. There have been various other manipulations of pipeline tariffs subsequently, all of which have been intended to deliver a subsidy to Tariff. So if we talk about pipeline efficiencies, there are some things that the discussion document leaves out. You know, the multi-products pipeline has accumulator tanks and operates on a bullet train principle. It has only 3 pump stations. The crude oil pipeline operates on what I've called, in inverted commas, milk train principles. It's actually built from bits and pieces of other older pipelines. It wasn't built as a dedicated pipeline. And it has 11 pump stations and has viscosity differences and all kinds of other differences, some of which I've covered in my submission. So one of the issues that comes up in the discussion document is this statement by Tariff, which says that the pipelines, don't transport the same substance. And I submit to you that is completely wrong, according to Tariff shareholders and others. The evidence is set out in my submission, but in the 1970s, the Petronet CEO wrote correspondence confirming that they were shipping diesel in the crude oil pipeline. In 2001, 2002, 2003, SASL representatives under oath have given evidence to the Competition Tribunal and others, swearing that diesel is transported in the crude oil pipeline and giving quantities and amounts which are set out in my submission. SAPIA, the Oil Industry Association Technical Committee in 2004 confirmed this. The Competition Tribunal decision of 2006, based on SASL and Engine evidence, who were the parties to that merger or proposed merger, under oath confirmed this. The Department's Energy Security Master Plan, Liquid Fuels of 2007, also confirms this. And then, of course, there are Transnet records. I only have for 2010 and 2011, but they confirm that diesel was shipped in the crude oil pipeline. So this statement that they don't transport the same substances is devoid of truth. Now, Tariff also alleges that the crude oil pipeline and the MPP networks are completely independent. They are not physically connected. That is this allegation. So if that's true, how did the diesel get into the crude oil pipeline? Did it fly in? It couldn't have done it by road. It couldn't have done it by ship. Couldn't have done it by rail. The only way diesel could get into the crude oil pipeline is by other pipelines from the refineries in Durban or from the ports, Durban to the inlet flange of the COP. So this idea that they're not physically connected is just wrong. How did the refined products move on from Tariff? Do they fly? Do they go by ship? Clearly not. Do they go by road? Yes, some. But most of them go by pipeline. So it's clear that Tariff is connected to Transnet's pipeline network for the further transport of their products. There are pipeline connections at both ends of the crude oil pipeline. So to say that they are not physically connected is wrong. The IATA also makes incorrect statements. It says that the multi-product pipeline can't ship jet fuel, but Transnet has evidence from 2022 to 2024 that they shipped 42 slugs of jet fuel just in those 2 years. So to say that the multi-product pipeline can't ship jet fuel is just wrong. NERSA also has legal advice in its documents to the effect that the Transnet pipelines constitute a system, not completely independent pipelines. So let's consider the possibility that what if, for some reason, the multi-products pipeline was out of order for an extended period? Security of supply inland would be compromised, and all sorts of efforts would have to be made to try to supply fuel inland. And, the quick fixes would be road, rail, increasing Secunda output if that was possible, but those would not be sufficient to meet the inland demand. And eventually the crisis would reach a point where it would dictate that the crude oil pipeline be used to ship refined products inland, even if it meant closing Tariff. So to say they are not part of the same system is just not to understand the nature of networks and the kind of insurance, in inverted commas, that networks offer. If you look at electricity networks, there's always supposed to be a reserve margin. I know we haven't had much recently because of load shedding, but they have that. The same is true of gas pipeline networks. They have other ways of trying to deliver to customers if a particular pipeline is out of order for a certain period. The converse is also true. What if the crude oil pipeline or Tariff were out of order? And we know Tariff has had several fires and been closed for extended periods in the past. For them, the multi-products pipeline serves as their backup. If they can't refine crude oil, they then service their customers by importing the volumes they need and running them up the multi-products pipeline. So remember the common carriage provisions, and I'm using that as a shorthand. That's not how it's worded in the Petroleum Pipelines Act, but I'm sure the regulator members are familiar with that section of the Act, which I've referred to as common carriage, applies. And we'll see just now what some of the implications would be if you could.
I don't know. It seems like we had a break. Dr. Crompton?
Chair, I think the start of the recording muted Dr. Crompton.
Dr. Crompton, if you may unmute, please.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, but you just share and continue, please.
Should I repeat this slide that's on the screen? Chairperson, I'm asking a question.
I don't see your slide anymore. Maybe it's me. If you can just unshare and share again.
All right, I will do that.
Apologies to all for the this technical glitch.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it now. You were still
going
talking.
to full screen.
Yeah, I think you were on the last, which is the fifth bullet around Tariff being out of order and the MPP serving as a backup. You may continue from there.
If the CO crude oil pipeline or Tariff were out of order for some reason, then the multi-products pipeline serves as their backup. They procure their fuel and ship it from Durban up the multi-products pipeline. So there's a network there, and the common carriage implications of that, I'm using common carriage as a shorthand. The regulator members will be familiar with in the Act, which we have referred to as common carriage in shorthand. So support for the incremental approach rests on fallacies. So I want to move on now to long life assets and life cycles. The multi-products pipeline has a 70-year useful life, and some pipelines in this network are old and some are new. And over time, those will reverse. What was once new becomes old and so on. So you've got pipelines at different stages of their life cycles in the network. So the obligation in the Act to make fair decisions requires intergenerational equity between older and newer assets. And NERSA does this in their methodology. They depreciate over the useful life of the asset to make sure that the whole value of the pipeline is not recovered in, let's say, the first 20 years instead of over 70 years. So intergenerational equity is already part of NERSA's philosophy, and that should apply to this decision. You can't determine fair in a network by reference to a single moment in time. NERSA has said that rolled-in tariffs would ensure that customers in the same geographic area served by the same pipeline destination pay the same tariff based on volume. The National Energy Regulator Act says that every decision must be in the public interest. An incremental approach is not in the public interest. Does Natref need a subsidy? And this question is posed not because I think NERSA should be involved in such a decision. My view is that whether it needs a subsidy or not should be based on a cost-benefit analysis. But from the evidence that NERSA has provided in the discussion document, there is no evidence provided by Natref that it needs a subsidy. NERSA decisions must be based on, quote, reasons, facts, and evidence. There is no evidence to support a subsidy to Natref. And an incremental tariff is just simply a way, an attempt to manipulate pipeline tariffs to deliver a hidden subsidy to Natref after the settlement with Transnet removed it. You'll be aware there were several court cases involving Transnet and Natref. Excuse me.
Please note that you have entered your 5 minutes grace period. Continue, sir.
The second point is that if you think of the long value chain from the mining of crude oil, shipping it, transporting it overseas, and all the links in the value chain up to the retail service station, there are many, many links. You can't claim, as Natref wishes to, that one link in that value chain is solely responsible for the profit or loss. I mean, just to take one example, what happens if you bought very expensive crude oil by mistake? That's going to affect your margin on your eventual profit or loss. But you can't blame the pipeline tariff for that. Natref's customers are its owners, and it controls its own profitability by manipulating various things. And I've set these out in some detail in my submission. If indeed it's proven that Natref warrants a subsidy, there are lots of other delivery instruments that the government could use to deliver that subsidy. As I said, I'm not in principle for or against subsidy. That's a different discussion. What I'm saying is that the Act does not permit the manipulation of pipeline tariffs to be used as the instrument to deliver that subsidy. Natref has benefits and costs. Yes, there are economic benefits from having Natref, but of course, NERSA's discussion document doesn't disclose the costs. The subsidy alone is worth about 20.8 billion so far and counting, approximately. So where is NERSA's proper cost-benefit analysis if NERSA insists that it should give a subsidy to Natref? There's a very poor attempt at it in the discussion document, which is not really worth commenting on, but there's no proper cost-benefit analysis. And in my submission, I provide detail about that. So if NERSA wants to subsidize Natref, who should pay the price? When the MPP was subsidized, the whole of NERSA paid the price, not just inland motorists, as Natref would propose should happen. So using pipeline tariffs for the subsidy would destabilize 20 years of regulation. It would set a precedent where 14 years after a methodology is introduced, people can come along and challenge it 14 years late. It would generate inefficiencies because if NERSA goes to the incremental tariff system as is proposed by Natref, all diesel shippers will demand to use the crude oil pipeline because the tariff is much lower than the MPP tariff. And so Transnet will lose revenue and there will be further complications. There will also be inefficiencies built into the system, but NERSA, you should expect that all diesel shippers are going to demand to use the crude oil pipeline the moment you introduce a lower tariff for it. It would be a breach of the requirement for reasons, facts, and evidence. Tariff says that something could happen. It says they could go bankrupt unless NERSA capitulates to their demands. Well, lots of things could happen, but you can't make a decision as NERSA on the basis that something might happen. It would also not be transparent. It would contradict NERSA's legal opinion that there's no legal basis in the Act. It would raise barriers to entry inland, and it would tarnish NERSA's image further. There are a lot of errors in the discussion document. I've highlighted 2 pages worth here, but let me just deal with those that I have time to deal with. The closure of the Durban refineries did not change inland demand, as NERSA seems to assume. Inland demand remains the same, regardless of the refineries. It's just the import substituted for refinery product. The closure of the DJP pipeline also did not change inland demand. There are no defunct inland refineries, as NERSA alleges. There are no inland refineries that have closed that could have led to an increase in the transport of refined products cost. So, I mean, these are fundamental, basic, simple errors in the discussion document which should never have been published with these kinds of errors. Increased imports did not increase prices, as NERSA alleges. The regulated basic fuel price remained the same. It carried on regardless of imports or local refinery production. I mean, these are simple, basic things that NERSA should not be getting wrong. There's no government policy that declares Tariff a strategic objective, as NERSA claims. Subsidies, as I've pointed out, for Tariff is a policy matter. It's outside the scope of the Petroleum Pipelines Act and the NERSA Act. There are no new practical and crucial questions. And if there are, as alleged in the discussion document, why are they being kept secret? Why doesn't NERSA tell us what these new practical and crucial questions are? Tariff is not the only one that has tanks and pipes in Durban and inland. The other oil companies also have their own tanks and pipes, and so do some of the merchant operators. Transnet doesn't give importers a free ride, as NERSA alleges. Tariff does not send fuel to the coast, as is raised in the discussion document. There's nothing strategic about Tariff's location. It was an apartheid, in my view, misguided attempt to create an inland petrochemicals hub. NERSA should not attempt to usurp policy and regulatory roles of the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, as it seeks to do in the discussion document. Industrial policy for the oil refining industry is not NERSA's responsibility. It's a government responsibility. Keeping old, small inland refineries profitable is not NERSA's responsibility. It is not NERSA's job to try and bolster dubious apartheid-era industrial policy decisions about an inland refinery. International procurement of petroleum products is not NERSA's responsibility. NERSA cannot only look at the benefits, it should also, and ignore the costs, it should also look at the costs and do a proper cost-benefit analysis that should be published for discussion before it takes a decision that involves hidden subsidies to Secunda and to Tariff. Importing products no difference to the distribution costs. There's no different pipeline tariff for locally produced fuels and imported fuels. And strategic stocks is not NERSA's responsibility. That's a government responsibility. So NERSA shouldn't indulge in this attempt to creep into government's policy space with making its decisions. It should, to quote someone we all know, NERSA should stay in its lane. Thank you for your indulgence, Chairperson. If I used a little bit of extra time, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Crompton. We'll then move to the questions and answer session. All that you need to assist with is to stand ready with your pen and paper to jot down the questions and then respond. We'll take a round of questions. Members, over to you. If you can just assist by raising your hand if you want to ask any question. By show of hands, please. I've got Madam Massetti, then Mr. Sibanda. Over to you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity. Good morning again, Dr. Crompton, and it is good to have your voice again in this platform, in the public hearings of the energy regulator, so that you can share your insights. Thank you very much for making the time to come and share these insights with us and the input. Just questions of clarity, Dr. Crompton, as you would know that we do want to hear the views of stakeholders and also for us to be able to take an informed decision as the regulator. Just on the question of the fact that we know this matter already was rejected, the approach. The rolled-in approach has been considered by the court, and the NERSA's decision was then set aside, and it has been remitted to NERSA to relook into this issue. And that is also based on the fact that it was seen to be irrational from an economic point of view. How do we deal with this, Dr. Crompton, given the fact that the regulator has taken decisions using this approach, the rolled-in approach, but the court found that this approach is irrational from an economic point of view. The economic rationale did not support this approach. How do we deal with that situation, given the fact that you are indicating that it is the approach that the regulator should be opting for? How do we deal with that? Because as we undertake this process, we are also trying to cure whatever the court pointed out to us and make sure that we also comply with the decision of the court. What will then be the kind of approach that would address the risk that you have indicated, one of those risks being the undue benefits that will be enjoyed by NATREF, as you indicated, or to avoid the windfall benefits or gains. How do we make sure that we can avoid that, but take a practical approach that will balance the interests of both customers that are of the view that these products are differentiated. These are not the same products, and that even if there's an element of interchangeability, that interchangeability is limited. The extent of substitution, where the customers could utilize the same pipeline and for different products, the extent of substitutability might be limited. And that is something that it will then need evidence to prove that the extent of substitutability can still be used or applied, even if it is limited, but to the extent that it is practical. How do you assist us with that kind of evidence, at least from the side of the regulator? Thank you. Those are the two questions that I have, Dr. Crompton, from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Mr. Sibanda, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Dr. Crompton for your presentation and your submission. Indeed, it's good to have you in these proceedings. Now, let me start perhaps with a legal question. And really is how do you respond to the view that there is no legal basis to treat the pipelines as as a system. If you consider what Section 28(1) of the Act says, it talks of a tariff being determined for a pipeline, but it doesn't refer to a pipeline system. How would you respond to that? And that any attempt, therefore, to try to deal with the pipelines as a system is counter to the letter and the spirit of the Act. And then maybe coming to the economic issues, and I want to approach this from just from an economic principles perspective. Now, you've indicated that the incremental approach will result in a huge subsidy to Tariff. Now, would you say that the current rolled-in approach also facilitates cross-subsidization? And as you would know, any form of subsidy by design distorts prices. And so what you get in the end are prices that are not cost reflective. So would you say that the rolled-in approach also does facilitate cross subsidization? And then perhaps to add to the question around substitutability as posed by Ms. Massetti, there's a view that these substitutability amongst the pipelines is limited, and from an economic perspective, for substitution to be effective, it needs to be done at least cost and timeously. But there's a view that for any substitution to occur now, there needs to be some kind of reconfiguration and time lag, and therefore what you get is a substitution that is really not effective or efficient from an economic perspective, because it incurs a cost and also happens with the time lag. So I just wanted your views on that as well. And then the current, or rather the rolled-in approach relies on average prices in a way, and I just want your view again, whether this is again from a pure economic principles perspective, whether determining prices based on average costs, is that optimal, or should we be looking at a different approach? And then lastly, just your take, or rather, let me put it this way: would you support perhaps a tariff that is a combination of the rolled-in approach and the incremental approach? Would you be in support of something that takes a bit of both, or is a mixture of the two approaches? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Maybe before you respond to Compton, let me just get you to reflect on two. Let's say if Tariff were just to simply say, we are not asking for subsidy, but we're asking to be charged for the COP only as a standalone. And then also refute that the MPP was actually not in place when there was the use of the COP. The use of the COP was mainly brought about by the lack of capacity or capacity constraints of the DJP, and say henceforth it becomes a very rare utilization, like not worthy to be considered as if they can be used alternatively. And lastly, I'd just like you to reflect on the tariff being a pass-through cost, just to reflect on that in terms of getting to a decision around the use of either approach. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, you may respond, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin then with Ms. Mercedes' questions, and thank you for the questions. I don't think I mentioned in my introductory that I did work at NERSA for 11 years as a regulator member, so it is good to see some old faces or hear some familiar voices, but just for the record. So regarding the first question about this court decision, well, I mean, my response is that, if the discussion document is anything like the kind of evidence that NERSA used in that case, then it's no wonder that NERSA lost. It leaves out some of the most important things, and presumably they were also left out of that court case. So the option there that I would recommend for NERSA is that you should appeal that decision, present the proper evidence, and help the courts understand. I mean, we do have a problem in South Africa that the courts are increasingly having to deal with regulatory issues coming from NERSA and other regulators. And with greatest respect to the courts, they are not familiar with these issues in regulation, like long-term assets, interchangeability, and those sorts of things. They just haven't had that much experience. So we have to help the courts as much as we can by providing full and proper evidence. So that would be my first response is you must appeal that decision, and you must present proper evidence which will help the courts come to the correct decision. If that fails, the second part of Ms. Mercedes' question, then my suggestion to you is if you look at my submission, we talk there about network services. So if you're going to have individual pipelines, there are network services. So let me just explain, for example, let's say you set a tariff for the crude oil pipeline on its own, and you ignore the fact that there's an SPM through which the crude oil is offloaded at sea off oil tankers and so on. A pipeline can't operate on its own. It's got an inlet flange and it's got an outlet flange. There are things that happen before the inlet flange, and there are things that happen after the outlet flange. So if you look at what's happening in electricity tariffs, Eskom is moving towards a service charge as part of the tariff. There'll be a fixed service charge. So that would be the way you could go. You could have a service charge because there are network services which the COP cannot escape from before and after the inlet and outlet flanges. And if you do proper network service charges, you will end up with the same tariffs as you have enrolled in tariff methodology. The third part of Ms. Mercedes' question about limited substitution. First, I would direct you to the evidence given by Sasol's experts at the Competition Tribunal in the Sasol-Engen merger, where they and other experts said that meeting Natref's crude oil requirements would still allow over 1 billion litres a year of diesel to be shipped. Okay. The second thing I would alert you to is that the moment you introduce a lower tariff for the crude oil pipeline, the other diesel shippers are going to use what I've called common carriage provisions in the Act to demand access to the COP. And that's going to lead to inefficiencies because the common carriage requirements requires all users to back out pro rata to their needs. And the needs of the diesel users will exceed the amount of oil that NATREF needs to run optimally. So it will place NATREF in financial jeopardy. And that is enforcing the Act. If you go this way of the incremental tariff methodology, you will in fact close NATREF. The very opposite of what NATREF is trying to achieve, because you will not be able to escape the common carriage provisions that will apply to the crude oil pipeline. Then moving on to Mr. Sibanda's question, or questions. The legal point about there not being reference in the Pipelines Act to a system, well, that may be the case. I haven't had a chance since your question to check the Act, but let's say it's true. That doesn't mean that there aren't systems. It just means that there must be a tariff for each pipeline in the system. And that's what NERSA has been doing with the rolled-in tariff methodology all these years. It has a pipeline in its tariff for each of the pipelines in its turn. So, you know, if you like, you can revert back to my second answer to Ms. Masetti, which is that you then introduce a service fee for being connected to other pipelines, because all the pipelines are connected to other pipelines. None of them stands on its own. And none of them, wants to avoid the use of other pipelines if their pipeline shuts down. So a proper service charge would deal with that. So your second question, Mr. Sibanda, about the economic issues, does the rolled-in methodology involve a cross-subsidy? No, it does not. It properly allocates the network services and the cost of those network services to the network users. The question about substitutability being limited, you talk about efficiency and so on. Part of efficiency is cost. And the huge differential that's proposed between the MPP and the COP in the incremental approach will, as I've referred to already, bring about the common carriage access request and the consequences which I've just described, which will ultimately lead to the closure of NATREF. So I don't think there are cross-subsidies involved. And I don't think the substitutability is limited. It's the Act's common carriage provisions which will dictate those things. You say that the question about the rolled-in methodology relies on average prices. Almost every regulated piece of infrastructure that NERSA regulates and others rely on averages. Look, for example, at petrol pricing. It's done on a postage stamp basis. The actual cost of delivery within a postage stamp are different, but they average it. It's not challenged. The same is true of port charges. The same is true of electricity charges. They are all averages of one kind or another. There's no part of regulation I know of which gets down exactly to the minutiae of the exact charge for each thing, because usage varies over time, not only in the short term, but also in the medium and the long term. So averages are part of regulating infrastructure. There's no escaping it, I'm afraid. Would I support a combination of a rolled-in and an incremental approach? Absolutely not. Moving on to Mr. Mkhize's questions. NATREF charge being standalone, I think I've answered that in the previous questions. The point about the MP multi-products pipeline being introduced because the DJB pipeline was too small, I don't really get the import of that in this discussion. It's part of the network. It's part of the backup that Tariff uses when it has, other problems, pipeline breakages or refinery shutdowns. And then your second question about the tariff pass-through, the tariff that NERSA uses for the MPP is the one that the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources usually uses as one of the build-up elements to the regulated petrol price. So any change to the multi-product pipeline tariff, any increase to it, will, on all past practice, result in a straight pass-through to inland motorists, not to all South African motorists, only to inland motorists, unless, of course, the government decided to absorb that cost, which I doubt if it would, but that would be a way to avoid it. And then basically government would be paying Tariff the subsidy for an unproven case, because what Tariff is saying is, please subsidize us because we may need a subsidy at some time in the future. I mean, that's just nonsense from a regulatory point of view, with all due respect. I hope I've answered all the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Crompton, for the responses you provided. I think if you feel or you think there's any need to augment in one way or another, maybe something that you might have left out, you please feel free to augment that via a written supplement within the next 7 days. We'll appreciate that. Thank you for your time. And again, nice to hear your voice again. This then concludes the first presentation. And thank you very much, Dr. Crompton. We'll move to Mr. Tembani Mazibuko from Vopec Terminal Durban Pty Ltd. I don't know if you are here, Mr. Tembani Mazibuko, sir.
Yes, Chair. I'm here. I hope I can be. You can hear me from where you are.
Thank you very much, sir. Do you have any objections to taking the oath?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. May you please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
Yes.
For the record, please state your name, company, and designation therein.
My name is Tembani Mazibuko. I'm the commercial and PD manager. I work for Vopec, a storage and terminal provider.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mazibuko. You've got your 15 minutes with a 5 minutes grace period added there too, to make the presentation, and thereafter you will simply have to take your pen and paper and be ready to take notes on the questions that the members of this panel will be posing. Over to you. Your time starts now.
Thank you, Chair, and the panel. Maybe to start off, I don't have a prepared presentation. I just wanted to make a comment regarding how we see as the impact of what's proposed in what we do. Maybe just as a background. Sorry, can you hear me?
Can hear you. I was saying that you are also good with that. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you. So just as a background, we are providing infrastructure. We have a terminal in the port of Durban, here, Vopec Terminal Durban. We do have another terminal inland, Lesedi, where we help our customers with storage. So from an infrastructure point of view as Vopec, we help the world flow forward by creating infrastructure with the right capacities to help the flows. And of course, here in South Africa, we play a pivotal role when it comes to security of supply, open access, and transformation. We see that as being really important because of the growing shortage that we've seen in South Africa and allowing for the imports to come through. And really what I would like to share from my experience here at VOPEC, I've joined before the expansion called Growth 4 that we did even before the 30. My experience primarily relates to the interest in the market, what we've been able to do, which I believe is really good work. And it relates to the impact of what's been proposed. It's very important to understand that back then, let's say from COVID and beyond coming, to nowadays, we've seen growth of the imported volumes. On the other hand, from what I understand, is that from the Transnet pipeline point of view, they haven't seen that growth. In fact, they've lost a lot of volumes. And to their surprise, they couldn't quite fathom why is that the case, given that from our side as VOPEC, we've seen much growth in the volumes. But the other key element on volumes is the element of our being independent. Maybe just to make that clear what it means. It basically means that we don't own molecules. We're purely doing infrastructure. And that's why we don't compete with our customers. And of course, from an industry point of view, all that we're interested in is flows. And because we are independent, we have the open access, which enables the key aspect, which is transformation and third-party access. So we pride ourselves in terms of that, what we've achieved. Although for the last few years, we would have hoped that the current tariff of the pipeline would have been much more lower than it is, because we believe we would have achieved much more work that is needed to provide access and also ensure handling of much more imported products. We've been constrained by the current level of tariff, not even mention what's been proposed. So the elements that are being affected primarily, if I can just summarize, we do this handling with safety in mind, with operational efficiencies in mind, and of course with sustainabilities. Now to start with safety, what we've seen is that the current Transnet pipeline MPP as it is has pushed volume onto the road, creating lots of trucks that has imposed safety in our communities and our roads and abound. And so much that we've seen a lot of bridging trucks coming from as far as inland in Johannesburg to come and pick up product here at port, exacerbating the congestion problems. So we've been hoping that there was going to be lowering of tariffs, which would have attracted volumes into the pipeline, and our customers, they would like to put more product in pipeline. But the issue is pipeline does not compete from cost competitiveness with trucks on the road. So what's been proposed, obviously, it just exacerbates that. It's actually unthinkable. So from the eyes and ears of customers that we engage and talk to, they would be much more willing to make it work through pipeline. But the problem is the fact that it's just from an economies of scale or economics, it just doesn't work. It becomes very expensive to use the pipelines. So what we would like to urge, ideally for us, is to have lower pipeline, because then you get more volumes and then your revenues on the pipeline will still go high. And remember that the more you sweat it, the more revenues you create. So instead of using the tariff as a lever, it's good to think about how do we make sure that we use volumes, thereby enhancing efficiencies, and eventually the outcome of that will be higher revenues. And in fact, by increasing tariffs, you might even push even more volumes away from the pipeline, which puts you in even a worse position. And that is not in the best interest from what I think from the industry and the flows and everybody else that can use. Perhaps if NESA could come up with mechanisms that are either perhaps could be differentiated along the lines of the independent or infrastructure providers, so that they can enable, with an open access in mind, anyone at a cost competitive rates or lower tariffs than current. And maybe investigating those in comparison with other ports elsewhere where there are much more efficient flows, it could certainly yield or deliver benefit. So with that in mind and the feedback from our customers, it's very important that also with the future that we're looking at in terms of the thinking that perhaps we might want to even get more volume in the pipeline. Instilling the pipeline is just even unthinkable. So I'm happy maybe to take some questions to that extent. I might not have it, presented the full extent of which, but it's just purely from what I've seen. But from ourselves as VOPEC, we've really helped third parties from the start, post-growth for primarily to move more product into pipeline. They've tried to work with us, come to Lesedi, where they could store as well, because that's the only place where they could access mainly, with an open access or independent status. So we really urge the regulator to try and assist as best as possible in a cohesive way with what needs to happen on the road along N3, to make sure that there's public safety, as well as in the communities and here in Durban, because the impact is huge. And let's all work together to put as much volume as possible into pipeline, making sure that we get the product into the main demand center inland from the coast. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Mwelase. We appreciate you saving us some minutes. Panel members, any questions from your side? By show of hands, please. Squad Madam Massetti, then Mr. Sibanda. In that order, over to you, Madam Massetti.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Mr. Mazibuko, for your brief presentation. I just want to understand, because it seems most of the submissions that we received, they are more concerned about the outcome, the effect of increased tariffs, higher tariffs. However, it is important, first of all, that with any methodology or approach that we are supposed to use, that such approach must be consistent with what the law requires us to do. Now, as you are concerned about the increase in the tariffs, how do we make sure as the regulator that we come up with the methodology or approach that will balance the interests of the various stakeholders, the ones that are utilizing the pipeline as customers, and the others that are providing the infrastructure for transportation? How do we balance that in such a way that first of all, those that provide infrastructure, they are still able to recover their investments. Secondly, that in the tariff that is charged, it is important to make sure that there is a fixed cost recovery. That becomes important in terms of two things, in terms of facilitating investment and also ensuring security of supply. Regulators must take into account the issue of the fixed cost recovery. And sometimes the issue of the fixed cost recovery would entail what people would say it's some price discrimination, but it is done because you have to recover fixed cost. What kind of input you will provide to assist the regulator in this regard, given the situation right now? Not one that is just looking at avoiding the effect. We know that there might be some higher price if you consider the incremental thing, the incremental approach. But how do we make sure that we will still be within our lane by using an approach that is within the mandate of the Act? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Over to you, Mr. Sibanda.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Mr. Mazibuko. I think it's good to have a voice that comes from a demand side or user perspective. You probably had the interactions or the questions that we posed earlier regarding substitution. So I wanted to check from your perspective, and assuming that there were problems with the multi-product pipeline, do you see any possibility, and maybe taken from your experience or your interactions within industry, do you see substitution between the MPP and the crude oil line as being feasible? Or perhaps to put it in another way, what would be a hindrance to such substitution? I know you've spoken about the intermodal substitution between the pipeline and roads, but I just wanted to check whether you've got any views, whether from industry experience or your interactions with colleagues in the industry, how you view whether that substitution between the MPP and the crude oil pipeline will be feasible, or what would hinder such substitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sibanda. I'll just like to ask one or two questions, Mr. Mazibuko, before you respond. Also, I must just highlight, I'm not looking at you responding exhaustively to these questions here and now, but I'm just requesting you to provide us written responses and to expand or augment whatever responses you are going to be providing by way of a written submission to NERSA within the next 7 days, which will greatly assist us, because we don't claim to have a monopoly of wisdom, and we need to take decisions that are well informed and also based on the principle of the law. I would like to know, you indicated that road is cheaper than pipeline as things are. I think if you have information in that regard, if you could kindly provide it, because this is a matter that the regulator is also currently looking at very intensively. So if you would assist to provide that. And the next thing that I would like to get from your side, I think is related to what Madam Asset has highlighted. There are certain effects and there are certain principles that undergate that effect. Because sometimes in life, if you are very much concerned about the effect without consideration of principles, you might end up being manipulative and looking at trying to get the kind of effect that you like instead of sticking to principles. Without necessarily being too prescriptive to you in this regard, I think I would appreciate that you talk to the principles that will undergird whatever approach that one takes. If you just have a comment around that, taking into consideration that we're dealing with a network and how what makes up the network needs to be considered, whether we're looking at it individually or we look at it as part of a system. So I would appreciate that you provide us written comments around that. I will then give you an opportunity now. Over to you, sir, to respond.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would certainly love to respond maybe after this, maybe to address each question, the first, second, and third, and come back. But just maybe on a high level now, I can just say that I do appreciate the various or many complexities around this, but again, it's not either or. It's an integration of the whole thing, but primarily making sure that we have the right priorities in mind with all these competing interests. So maybe regarding the first question from Madam Maseti, maybe without answering in details per se, I think that I've tried to highlight what I think is quite key, elements such as safety and other similar things, to make sure that as much as we're balancing all these interests, there's key elements that cannot be overlooked, even from a principled approach. But certainly one can look at answering further, but I think that it's very important that we are very clear regarding what problem are we solving and how does it relate to the key priority or priorities, and how do those stack up, taking into account what is most important with the country first approach mindset, because the laws, they serve people and they serve the country. And some of the small things we do on the ground is driven by the purpose behind it. But of course, with all the various competing elements, it's good to be clear in how you stack them up. What comes first, second, third, and fourth? But of course, it's not an easy question that you need to do, quite a synthesis or unpacking of various elements to make sure that the approach, is balanced in terms of that and the interest. And of course, taking law into the country, because even law is broad, it has various facets. And I do believe that as a country as well, we cannot have laws that goes against each other completely, or we might have different priorities at a time. But at this moment, right now, for South Africa, what is the key priority at the top? Yes, we know there's law that allows all kinds of things, especially living in a democracy. But at the moment, what would we put as number one, number two, number three? And of course, it could be time dependent. And maybe just a short comment on the other one regarding substitution. I'll come back on that one, but I think from where we come from, we're all about logistics and efficiencies and how things should work better. And maybe let me not just comment on that, maybe rather come back on and writing. But I do have a thought around that, but I'd much rather come back on a written one. And of course, on the principles where we've shared, for example, the elements such as security of supply, open access transformation, those things are very, very important. You cannot brush them aside. And I think that we've come a long way. And it's really important that we become serious. We live in accordance with what the key principles that should drive where we are, and of course, addressing the future needs. But I will certainly write back on each one and try to quantify them. And of course, I know there's a point around market studies, because you can do studies around these to try and establish the facts on the ground. What are the areas, what are the problems to be solved, so that you can act based on facts, concrete facts. And we've tried to do that on our side. But I can imagine maybe on your side as well, you would have done some studies to establish facts on the ground so that the decision is data-driven.
Muelas are still there?
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard me, but I've concluded.
Okay, no, that's fine. No, we appreciate your responses, and I think it would greatly assist us to get those written comments or supplements to what you have just responded to. That would be highly appreciated if you can just favor us with that within the next 7 days, taking due cognizance of the importance of this matter. I will leave it at that. And once again, thank you very much. It's nice to hear views, from your vantage point. I would then like to proceed then to Mr. Rudy Hesterman or Madam Tongane. I don't know if you are here. May you please step to the mic?
Can
You spoke and you kind of Brooke.
Okay, there we go, Chair. Yes, we are here. Good morning to you, yourself.
Okay,
members of the panel.
may you switch on your camera because I want to be able to administer the oath to you. Please, sir.
We have it on our side, Chair. Is it not visible on yours?
It's consulting.
Let me see if I can see you here.
No,
can
I'm
see
not
them.
under someone. I'm under consulting room.
From my side,
Oh,
Chairperson, I
yes,
can see
yes,
them.
yes. Now I
You can
see
see
you.
them.
Now I see you. You are on another page on my side. You know, also nice to see you, Rudy. You know, this industry is kind of small. I mean, we kind of know everyone around. We will. Do you have any reservations regarding taking the oath?
No, Chair, I'll take the oath. Our presentation on the main will be done by Advocate Turner, SC, and as is practice, Advocate Turner won't take the oath as he's making a legal presentation, but I am, and I'll then assist with the questions that are asked at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. May you please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
For the record, please state your name, company, and designation therein.
I am Rudy Histewan. I am the Senior Manager responsible for economic regulation and pricing in Sasol Energy with specific responsibilities for Sasol Oil and Sasol Gas.
Thank you.
Chair, I'll now hand over to Advocate Turner.
Okay, noting that Advocate Turner, you won't be taking the oath, would just like you to state your name, your company, and your designation therein.
Hi, my name is Duncan Turner. I am an advocate at the Johannesburg Bar, and I'm instructed here on behalf of Sasol by Mchunu attorneys.
Thank you.
Chair, may I share a presentation?
Yeah, you share your presentation. Just to note that you present, you've got your 15 minutes with your grace period of 5 extra minutes, and then you would then stand ready to take questions from the panel members, as we have seen happening with the preceding two presenters. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just struggling to. Okay, I'm going to ask Ms. Singh to present on my behalf because I am technically challenged. Chair, can you confirm that you have the PowerPoint presentation on your screen?
The PowerPoint presentation is on the screen and you seem ready to go.
Thank you very much. Chair, I've heard the discussion earlier today, and I think much of what the concerns that have been raised are concerns that are recognized by Sasol. The position that we're in is that a decision was taken in 2011. That decision has caused much loss and concern over the years, and we've had almost probably more than 10 years of litigation in trying to resolve the consequences of those decisions and their impact in the market. We are now at a position where we need to look forward. It's not in anybody's interest to look backwards. We are not in a position where there are refineries at the coast where everybody takes for granted the existence of a South African industrial complex. We're in a position now where we need to look after the interests of South Africa and South Africans going into the future. We need to be alive to what industry requires and what the consumer requires and try to strike a balance in accordance with the legislation. So if I can go into our presentation, because of the limited time and the number of slides, I'm going to rush the first few slides. Sorry. First, the relevant legislation. There are two important elements in Section 28. The first is the Section 28.2 that says what a tariff must take into account. And the second is 28.3 that says the aggregate of the tariffs must be able to cover the operator's costs, the investment, maintain the system, etc. Those are the two major outputs that NERSA must be alive to when it delivers a set of tariffs. Now, going up to the primary obligation is it does so by setting tariffs for a pipeline, and it was alluded to by one of the questions earlier. Sorry, I lost. The requirement is that a tariff must be set for a pipeline, and currently, as we've shown at the bottom of this page, NERSA does identify each pipeline in its approach. It does publish a separate tariff for each pipeline, but unfortunately, NERSA does not set those tariffs individually or separately, and that is the main problem. The current methodology document, which is the focus of the discussion document and this inquiry, there is actually a methodology document published by NERSA. I didn't hear it discussed earlier. But the current document has two parts. It has 12 chapters, 11 operative chapters, but it only has two parts. Sections 1 to 10 deal with the allowable revenue. In other words, what revenue Transnet needs. And that effectively sets the absolute value of the tariffs that are required to be charged. Now, if there is a general concern about the amount that's recovered from pipeline tariffs, it's the overall revenue that's affected. But those sections 1 to 10 address 28.3, that requirement we identified of 28.3. The methodology sections 1 to 10 only deal with 28.3. The 28.2 compliance is purportedly addressed in Chapter 11 or Section 11. But we'll show you that that's where the gap exists in the current methodology. Now, the discussion document has an unfortunate error, and we call it NERSA's misconception. And it's a misconception that's been published in each of NERSA's decisions on pipeline tariffs over the past few years as well. It says, we're following the 2011 decision and methodology. And NERSA's discussion document departs from the premise that that is still a published methodology that they need to change. We heard Mr. Crompton earlier talking about it too, but it's not correct. It is correct that the NERSA methodology has recorded a rolled-in approach to determine allowable revenue for Transnet each year. But when it's determining allowable revenue, its approach has been to adopt a rolled-in approach. But when it comes to setting tariffs, it has not done so. It is correct that in March 2011, NERSA published a version 5 of its methodology, and in that it did prescribe a rolled-in approach to tariff setting. And it did that with that reference to average tariffs. It said, we take the total allowable revenue, divide it by the total litres per kilometre, and we get a throughput tariff, and then we apply it as an average tariff across the entire network of Transnet pipelines. That was the decision that was taken by Mr. Crompton in 2011. But in 2013, NERSA's version 6 and its decision expressly deleted that section. Now, we've been through the courts. These are all things that the courts have considered. But this is where the sort of departure point, understanding that the NERSA team may still be unaware of. But in 2013, the tariff setting element of the rolled-in approach was deleted from NERSA's methodology. The current methodology, which is version 8, has only this one paragraph. So when Dr. Crompton's team set the tariff decision in 2011, they wrote 5 pages on a rolled-in tariff approach. That was all deleted in 2013. And the current version has one short paragraph. It says, NERSA will set tariffs based on the specific circumstance of specific licensee while taking cognizance of the requirements of section 28(2). So the fundamental misconception is that while NERSA believes it does prescribe a rolled-in approach to tariff setting, its methodology actually does not prescribe such an approach. Now, there is this debate around incremental and rolled-in. A pure incremental approach, which is the one that was criticized earlier today, would take each pipeline separately, close its eyes to everything else, say what are the costs, etc., of that pipeline, use overheads and other shared costs from Transnet, and develop an allowable revenue only for that pipeline, and then set a tariff to recover that revenue. That would be the pure incremental approach. But that would also suffer from problems. Because remember, the legislation doesn't say you must pick an incremental approach or pick a rolled-in approach. It says you must take into account a series of factors. And so when you look at other factors, you will start adapting or amending that number to fix it, to take account of those factors. Now, a rolled-in approach, you would determine the allowable revenue across the system. So you'd say, what are all the costs of the pipeline system, and determine the allowable revenue. But that allowable revenue, if it's done correctly, should be the same as the aggregate allowable revenue that you achieve with the incremental approach, because you're counting the same costs. One, you're counting it in a big bucket. The other one, you're counting it in lots of little buckets, but those little buckets add up to the big bucket. So your allowable revenue answer should be the same. The question then is, how do you set the tariffs that come from that in order to achieve that revenue? And that's where you're either going to start with a big gap between tariffs on the incremental side. You're going to say there's a very high tariff for the MPP because it's got high costs, and a very low tariff for the COP because it's got low costs. And now we need to input fairness, consumer affordability, etc., in order to close that gap, because those factors need to be applied. Or you start with a rolled-in approach and say we're going to develop an average tariff, and now we look at the pipelines and we say, well, are they different? And apply those factors to move them away from the average and create a gap. But that's the methodology that you approach. And we recognize that a rolled-in approach is a simpler way to determine allowable revenue. But what you can't do, which is what NERSA has done, which we've been litigating about for 10 years, is that NERSA has said, well, I've used a rolled-in approach to determine allowable revenue, and therefore I must take a simple average of everything else and close my eyes to the other factors. And that is the legal error that has been committed by the NERSA team, with the greatest of respect. And that is, in effect, the finding of the review court, where the court has set that aside. So when we say what should the changes be to the tariff methodology, we do not propose a change to the allowable revenue approach and to the rolled-in approach to determining allowable revenue in chapters 1 to 10, or sections 1 to 10 of the methodology. We say Transnet must be able to recover revenue in order to provide the services. If that total amount is very high, there are other ways to resolve that. But contrary to NERSA's belief, use of a rolled-in methodology to determine allowable revenue does not result automatically in applying an average or rolled-in tariff. Having determined the allowable revenue using a rolled-in approach, you need to carefully consider the factors and apply them, the ones in section 28(2), and that is what is now to be recorded in the amended section 11. It's how you apply those factors in a systematic, comparable, and a reliable way. What are the pipelines? The first essence is, what are the pipelines? And we agree with NERSA that there are 4 individual pipelines. They are the crude oil pipeline, the multi-product pipeline from Durban to Jameson Park, the AVTA pipeline to Ortia, and the Northern Network, because it comes from Jameson Park or Sasolburg and it goes to various destinations inland. And so those are the 4 buckets in which the pipeline assessment should be done. And this ought to be relatively simple. At the moment, that's exactly how NERSA does it. That is the NERSA publication, or I think that's Transnet's publication after the NERSA decision. And what we've color-coded there is to show that the blue at the top is the airport line. The light blue is all the northern networks. They all apply this. They should apply the same throughput tariff. The green is the crude oil pipeline to Colebrook, to Sasolburg. And the brown at the foot is Jameson Park. Now you'll see that there is a series of uncolored tariff public elements there. That's Durban to the different internal destinations. And what we point out in the second bullet there is that the tariffs published for conveyance from Durban to each inland destination are not separate pipeline tariffs. They are useful published numbers, but they are merely an aggregate of the MPP and the Northern Network tariff from Jameson Park or Sasolburg to the end. So once you've got that framework correctly, then the question is, well, where do we adjust it? Where is it not fair and where does it discriminate if you use the same tariff for different services? And we say the critical feature in the differential, and this has been the subject of the successful litigation against Transnet in relation to the variation agreement. That variation agreement is gone, but the concept is the same. It's been the successful feature of the review applications against NERSA, because there is a big difference between the assets and the infrastructure and the services on the MPP and the COP, and those have not been taken into account at all. And that is the critical element that needs to be addressed. And so we've pointed out there that the High Court has confirmed Sasol's argument and that NERSA's approach is incorrect, that one cannot merely blindly apply a rolled-in approach to tariff setting. You have to take account of the differences and apply the legislation. So the requirement is to investigate and identify all relevant facts, then assess the tariffs for the individual pipelines relative to one another, because that's where one considers fairness, discrimination, etc. And then at the end, once you've adjusted it, you need to just check and confirm that after adjustment, you are still able to cover the allowable revenue to comply with Section 28(3). We've summarized the differences. The details are in our written submissions, but let's just run through the summary. The capital cost of the MPP is more than 3 times the cost of the COP. Now, I heard Dr. Crompton say earlier, well, there's depreciated assets, etc. The data shows that if you built them today, the MPP is still twice as expensive. If you built them on exactly the same cost model, the MPP is still twice as expensive as the COP. The next point, again, is critical. There are additional things that are included in the tariff that MPP customers get. They get free storage in Durban. They get free refractory, not free, but the refractory services in Tarleton are paid out of that tariff. And there's free storage in Jameson Park. Those are included in the tariff that the MPP users use. Sasol and Prax the users at Tariff, they've got to pay for they've got their own storage in Durban. They pay for it. They've got their own storage in Sasolburg. They pay for it. And so effectively, by charging them the same tariff, you're asking the Tariff users to pay for the MPP users' storage and accumulation and pay their own. That's not fair. They effectively pay twice. The other thing is that there are far less people and services involved in delivering the COP service than there is the MPP. In the MPP, you've got complicated scheduling with slugs of different products for different customers. And it goes into the northern network from Jameson Park. It's a very complicated service. The COP.
I must object. Advocate Turner is giving evidence. He's not confining himself to legal issues. He must take the oath if he wants to give evidence.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Crompton. Let's just wait. I just want to give an opportunity to run through everything. Then we're going to talk to whatever. And please, now, as a person that is an attendee, if you've got any questions, whatever that you want to ask, I've put the name of Madam Patience Maswanganye. The email address is patience.maswanganye@nersa.org.za. Thank you. May proceed, sir.
Thank you very much. There are multiple products and multiple customers, and so there are increased costs.
Just hold a second. I see Madam Maseti's hand is up. How can I help you, ma'am?
Chairperson, I think it is important as part of your guidance that Advocate Turner limits his arguments on legal arguments and not necessarily delve on the facts that will require sort of the economic evidence and so forth. So it's important that because he has not taken the oath, the understanding was that he will confine himself on legal arguments, and that is important in terms of his presentation. It is for you, Chairperson, to just make sure that the process is adhered to. Thank you, Chair.
Chairperson,
Thank you.
May I cut through this? Mr. Histerman has been the person giving the instructions on the facts, and perhaps we can ask Mr. Histerman now to confirm that the facts that are included in this presentation are true and correct.
Let's make it easier, Advocate Turner. Let's get Mr. Histerman to present that portion. You deal with the portion that is from your side, because we don't want the argument that this was not given under oath, etc. May you please just do things like that. Please don't complicate a simple matter.
We're very short on time, Chair. If Mr. Histerman confirms these facts, I'm not going to dive into many facts. These are sort of high-level summary facts. The facts are all in Sasol's submissions.
Mr. Histerman, do you confirm these facts?
Yes, Chair, I do confirm those facts.
Given under oath, considered to be given under oath by yourself.
Yes.
Okay, let's proceed.
Thank you. So the first point, and this is a fact that comes out of NERSA's publication. If one were to take only the costs of the COP and the MPP, you would be comparing a tariff of 7 cents charged on the COP with a tariff of 123 cents per litre on the MPP. If you were applied, there would be a 95% difference, 95% of the MPP tariff, that would be the difference. That would have a significant effect on the price of fuel paid by consumers. The second difference are those fewer and complex services. I've used the summary and we've included the detail here. The third difference is the supply chain. Again, these are facts that are confirmed. COP and the MPP are involved in different parts of the supply chain. The COP is upstream. It's effectively a pipe into a refinery. The MPP is a distribution channel, very different level of the supply chain and the economy. One cannot put crude oil into a car. They're not interchangeable. So crude oil is a product that goes into a refining process. It's not the same as the products in the MPP, and the two are not equivalent services. This is an indicative calculation showing the impact, and I'm going to concentrate on the left. I hope everyone can see it. We've said, and the way in which NERSA publishes its tariffs is that the tariffs from Sasolburg to destination, and we've used Elroad as an example, and from Jameson Park to a destination, they are equivalent. So when you use, say, 1,000 litres of petrol going from Sasolburg or 1,000 litres of petrol going from Jameson Park to Elroad, the cost is the same. And that cost can then be recovered in the sale of the petrol. However, in order to get that 1,000 litres of petrol to the dispatch gate at Sasolburg, Sasol needs to transport 1,130 litres of crude oil, because crude oil doesn't convert 100% into refined products. Only a percentage of that which is transported can actually be sold as a refined product. And so when the importer who brings fuel into South Africa lands it at Durban and brings it to Jameson Park, takes 1,000 litres, on these numbers, obviously the numbers will change, but on these numbers, the importer only pays 478 Rand to get it to the inland. Sasol must pay 541 Rand just to get 1,000 litres, which is the same effectively what they end up selling in the market. And so there is a fundamental disjoint in the cost of bringing refined product in. And we would just emphasize that the reason these pipelines are here is because we are trying to get petrol and diesel to the inland, and sometimes have to, but that is the key reason. And so when you look at what the key reason for them are and why Transnet provides this service, it's the 1,000 litres that we're interested in. And that, in order for there to be an equivalence, Sasol should be paying the same as an importer. It shouldn't be required to subsidize the importer, because you've seen what the costs are. That importer would be paying way more, and Sasol would be paying way less if we used costs. Instead, on a cheaper line, it's paying a more expensive price. And that's not fair. That's discrimination. We get down to the affordability requirement. It's very, very important, and Sasol recognizes it, that NERSA ensures that there are affordable petroleum products in the market. But we highlight that long-term access to affordable petroleum products is equally important as short-term affordable access. And our colleague from VOPAC pointed out security of supply is a critical aspect in this country. And if you are undermining Natref's viability, you will lose the only local refinery servicing the inland. And we heard earlier that it shouldn't be strategically important to the country to consider Natref. Natref is a national key point. It is, by its very design and nature, a key strategic element of the South African infrastructure. So Sasol says the fundamental objective of the legislation and NERSA's job is to ensure that the system is simple, transparent, predictable, stable, and consistent with a systematic methodology. So you ensure the aggregate value of the tariff achieves the allowable revenue. You apply different tariffs where assets and services are different to achieve fairness and non-discrimination in the tariff structure. And as the SCA has confirmed, a difference in tariff between the COP and the MPP is justified and would not be discrimination. This is a quote directly from the SCA's judgment. Differentiation based on sound reason does not amount to discrimination. In this matter, and they are talking about the two pipelines, if the neutrality principle were not applied, there would be no differentiation despite the different circumstances. So the neutrality principle, in short, is recognizing that difference that I've just explained to you on the diagram. And when you manage that impact, you say there must be a difference, but we temper that difference because consumer prices are important, but so is long-term security of supply. So Sasol's proposal is this. It says if their relative costs and services were the driving factor, you would have a very large 95% difference. The very large difference would impact consumers. It would also impact, as we heard from our friends from VOPAC, it would also impact the price, the overall price of pipelines, and that would be beneficial either. So Sasol does not support a pure cost-based differential. As we recognize, it would ignore section 28(2)(a)(6). So the differential must be reduced to protect affordability, but it must also recognize cost, yield, and service differences. So Sasol's calculation promotes cross-subsidization in the interests of consumer affordability, but it protects Natref refinery against prejudice arising from cost, yield, and service differences. And importantly, it avoids promoting the interests of importers over local refiners, which would happen if we continued with the rolled-in averaged approach. Sasol says, taking into account these differences, and we've set out the calculations, there are economic reports that support this, at the very least, it should be 11.5% lower than the MTP tariff. And what's important here is Sasol, we're not interested in the overall absolute value of the tariff, because the overall absolute value is recovered in the market. We try to recover what we are charged. But at the moment, but we need a differential between the two, because at the moment we're only able to recover 100, but we are paying more than 110. And that's what we are unable to recover on the refined products. And so, and we disagree with Dr. Crompton when he was asked, can you have a combination of the rolled in or the incremental approach? And we say that the all or nothing or binary approach is wrong. A rolled in approach is appropriate and an acceptable method to calculate Transnet's allowable revenue in sections 1 to 10. But having used that method, care must be taken to determine the tariffs. A simple average is not a lawful result, and the High Court has confirmed that. We say mathematically, the simplest approach is to start with determining a simple average over the entire system, but then NERSA must adjust those values, having that average, having regard to the factors in section 28.2. The key results then is the tariff for the COP is lower than the tariff for the MPP. The value of that difference should be at least 11.5%, taking into account the factors that we've referred to. The tariffs charged from Sasolburg and Jameson Park to the inland destinations should remain to be equivalent, so that the only adjustment needs to take place coming from Durban to the inland, and then all the other factors can be equivalent. And this is the best approach because it addresses the main costs and the risks of the rolled-in approach, as set out in Table 3 of the discussion document. It maintains the major benefits of the rolled-in approach in Table 4. It applies the factors that the legislation requires and therefore avoids the litigation. And it can be explained to stakeholders because it's based on facts and it recognizes the competing interests. So Sasol proposes that NERSA consider a revision to section 11 of the methodology document, and it remains available to consult with NERSA on the wording of any amendment. we want to reiterate that it's the interests of South Africa and the people who live in South Africa that are at the center of this discussion. But those interests have been identified and regulated by legislation. Parliament has identified what should be taken into account and how it should be taken into account. And we must have regard to what Parliament says. Using incremental and rolled-in methodologies in the abstract or outside, those aren't terms that appear in the legislation. They are terms we've brought in to try to find a way to do what they've asked us to do. But having decided on a particular term, you can't ignore the rest of the words. And so we would invite NERSA to seriously consider these proposals, which we think can be done sensibly and in the interests of all parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, why I wanted to do this is Mr. Histerman just confirming that these the facts put forth in terms of the figures, etc. here are considered as evidence given by you under oath. Just to confirm that, okay.
Yes, Chair, we confirm that, and we would also refer the regulator to economics reports on this issue that we've submitted before.
Thank you. May we then proceed to the question and answer session? Please have your pen and paper ready. I heard the advocate was talking about being technically challenged, but you may also use any gadgets that you have to take the questions and then respond to the questions after the round of questions. Members of the panel, please assist me by raising your hands if you have any questions. Start with Madam Pungose, followed by Madam Maseti. Over to you, Madam Pungose.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just to thank Mr. Histerman as well as Advocate Turner for the presentation. I've got two questions on the technical presentation, so you'll guide me, Chair, who I pose them to, but they are questions to Sasol nonetheless. I think the first one is with regard, what I wanted to find out, would Sasol be willing to consider a possible differential rolled-in approach that would take into consideration the crude oil pipeline features? Would that something that they would like to consider? And the next one is, should the tariff approach perhaps be changed, resulting in Sasol Oil paying lower tariffs for the crude oil pipeline? How will the gains then be transferred to the end users? And would this change benefit Sasol Oil's coal to liquids operations? That is all from me, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Pungose. Over to Madam Maseti.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to Sasol and for their presentation. There are things that I just want to clarify, and the things I would like to clarify, they relate to both Section 28 read with Section 21 on non-discrimination. And this might actually be important for purposes of sequencing, because we can't say that we can take there must be non-discrimination, yes, on the factors that are mentioned in Section 28, main ones being the affordability aspect as well as fairness. Now, those two factors are also factors that may well be taken into consideration when NERSA implements the section on non-discrimination, because by their very nature, non-discrimination seeks to prevent unfairness. But then we need to take that into within the right context. Again, on issues of charging differential pricing or if you like, price discrimination or non-discrimination. Affordability will be one of the factors, but it does not end there. There is also a proposal, and there might be more other factors, because Section 21 says that the non-discrimination must be based on must be based on.
I'm listening.
Chairperson, your mic is on. Your mic is on, and it causes an echo. And I thought that you were saying something to me.
No,
Hence
no.
I stopped. Yeah, it interrupted.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that Section 21, it states clearly that the non-discrimination that is prevented there, or that is prescribed in terms of classes, access, conditions, and service, except, so it is not just prevented. There are certain grounds within which the regulator may allow differential, but under objective and justifiable grounds that the regulator must approve. Now then, this becomes important then in terms of those grounds, especially to read with Section 28, where NERSA may want to first determine the right allowable revenue for Transnet, which you are saying you are not opposed to in terms of NERSA doing it, even with the rolled-in tariff approach to determine just what is required, the required revenue. But then your issue is, how does NERSA allocate the rates now in terms of the customers so that then that allowable revenue can be recovered? And that is the point where you say that NERSA must now, when it does that, NERSA must consider the factors which Section 28 allows us to use those factors. And in the way that we come up with those factors, we must give due regard to Section 21, which says that NERSA must then have objective and identifiable grounds to be able to allow some non-discrimination. I just want to confirm whether indeed that is your position, and I added deliberately Section 21, as you mentioned 28, but that 28, you must do it within the parameters of Section 21. That's the first thing I want to understand. That is the approach that you are proposing. Then the second thing that is linked to that then, and I would like to test this with you, is the sequencing of the processes, that for predictability and transparency purposes, would you propose or agree that NERSA would have to come up with what it would view as objective and identifiable differences or grounds for allowing the price differentials? And such price differentials may take into account, for instance, affordability, because it is there. Affordability may take into account fairness, may take into account service, conditions of service. Even I would also use what Dr. Crompton has mentioned, just to illustrate the point. The fixed service, for instance, I'm just using that as, maybe some of the factors the regulator may come up with, publish them, ask stakeholders to comment on those differentiations, so that when it implements Section 28, at least the factors that will be utilized there are well known. And that takes care of non-discrimination, which takes us to Section 21. I just want to understand that. Then the third thing that I would like to understand is the question of interconnection of the pipelines in question. You mentioned 4 pipelines also from your side. So there's an issue of interconnection, which I will tie it up with the question of or issue of limited substitutability. And that substitutability, if you may also assist us, explaining that substitutability from the supply side as well as from the demand side. From your side, you only singled out Sasol in terms of the cost occasioned by Sasol in the utilization of the pipeline. So can you please assist us in terms of the interconnection of these pipelines, if they are interconnected or whether they are standalone pipelines and can be operated as standalone pipelines to service Sasol? Can they work as standalone pipelines to service Sasol from one point to another, or they will need to work as a system? By the way, Section 28 also allows the operation of the pipelines in as much as you would look into the cost of the pipeline so that you know what that cost is. But Section 28 also does mention the operation of...
Mr. Massetti, just a while. If you may just assist in terms of time, just to zoom into the question itself without maybe giving a lot of prelude to things like that. Thank you.
I'll stop here, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Massetti. Mr. Sibanda?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I thought the CEO will come first, but yeah, let me thank Advocate Turner and Mr. Hesselman for the presentation. So maybe let me start off with the proposal from Sasol. And do you accept that any change from the current approach, whether to incremental or to your proposal, excuse me, of first using a rolled-in approach and then taking into account the differences in the pipelines, would actually result in an increase from current tariffs? Although in your proposal, perhaps that will be much lower than what it will be if the change were to go straight into the incremental approach. But do you accept that nevertheless there will be an increase in tariffs, and that is not favorable, or from at least from a consumer perspective, it's disruptive to the market and not to the consumer's advantage, which again then brings me to the issue around Section 28 to sub 6, that we are mandated to look into the affordability of the tariff that we set. And do you think that changing to your proposal would actually promote the affordability aspect as mandated in Section 28 sub 2(6)? Now, you've also indicated that the COP and the MPP serve different parts of the value chain. Well, firstly, we had evidence earlier that these pipelines are actually connected. Now, are you disputing that particular fact, that the pipelines are actually connected? Secondly, you've also given an example that crude oil cannot be used in a car. But I thought that we are talking about substitutability of the infrastructure here and not the use of the end product, that is crude oil and refined products. So we're talking about substitutability of the transportation system or the pipelines, whether those pipelines can actually be interchangeable in terms of transporting the various types of products. Again, we had evidence that at some point, Sasol actually confirmed the substitutability of the pipelines, including evidence that was given before the Competition Tribunal. Now, are you disputing that fact, that there is no substitutability, even though at some point Sasol did give evidence to that effect? Yeah, Chair, maybe let me stop here. Okay. Now, the issue around fairness and again, coming to your proposal that we use the rolled-in approach and then take into account the differences in the pipelines, and then apply different tariffs depending on the circumstances of each pipeline. Do you think that promotes again the objective of fairness in that instance, as required by Section 28 again? If consumers were to face different tariffs, yet the final product or the use is the same, but they are now faced with different tariffs on account of differences in the pipelines or in the transportation system being used. Does that promote fairness in your view? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sibanda. Over to you, Advocate Sithole. Advocate Sithole, may you please unmute yourself?
Apologies, Chairperson. I was talking to a muted mic. Thank you, Chairperson, for the opportunity, and thanks to the Sasol team. My question is just only one, and it's a point of, not a question, rather a point of clarity to Sasol team, to say that in terms of the interpretation of Section 28, would they say that it empowers the regulator to prescribe a single methodology to set and approve tariffs or not? Because from the presentation that has been shared to us, my inference is that they seem to be saying a no. If I can be clarified on this, I'll appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Sithole. I think maybe let me also put a few questions from my side so that you can just deal with all the questions. One, please assist in terms of clarification, because you seem to be, in the beginning, you are against the rolled-in tariff, and then at the end, you are then saying that the rolled-in tariff must be fine, but must be modified, taking into consideration that you've got crude oil. If I paraphrase, that has got co-products and not only petrol, diesel, and jet fuel. So I just want to get clarity there. And you indicated a 10 years of litigation to try to address the 2011 decision. I joined NASA in 2018. It seems like this only started, the litigation actually is a new thing. And somehow it happened after the variation agreement was ceased. is this a way of trying to claw back to what the benefit that you had as a variation agreement or not? Because we looked at the variation agreement as a company-to-company agreement, way of state policy matter separate from the legal side. I just want to get clarity there. You also are saying that you are concerned of you are doing all of this in the interest of SA, and then I'm looking at it. I'm saying if you're looking at the effects like safety, operational efficiencies, and etc., is it really in the interest of SA, or this is just in the interest of Sasol? Noting also that you are dealing with Sasol here, just would like to know, is this also the stance of Prax as a partner at NATREF? Which then takes me back to the issue of Sasol Secunda. To say that if you're looking at NATREF and you're calling for the differentiation of this kind, are you also saying that should proceed further and do the same differentiation when it comes to Sasol Secunda? Taking into cognizance that this is a pass-through cost, which then should actually leave each player revenue neutral. And then I would also like to know the issue of possible windfall profits. I know that there was an issue of a windfall tax that was spoken to in the early 2000s. I'm not necessarily going there, but I would just like to know if you think that any windfall profits to Sasol Secunda needs then to be dealt with in this manner, in the sense that we've got the tariff as a pass-through cost. And then you spoke of that the approach ceased, and as I said, it was not challenged in 2013. Why not? And then, what do you make of the reference to the pipeline system as a system? And do you recognize a difference between the methodology as such and the approach? And when it comes to Section 28, do you recognize the difference of a pipeline having a tariff attached thereto, irrespective of the methodology that brought it into play? Yeah, I think the other questions in some way are covered by my colleagues. Over to you, sirs, if you may please respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the panel for the questions. I think in terms of the question from Ms. Mpongose, I think in terms of our willingness to consider a tariff that recognizes the differences, that's the basis of our presentation here. The direct effect on what it would have on tariffs to the public, we will respond to that in writing if the chair is agreeable. We don't have the exact information here, and we need to ensure that we have that clearly outlined and well motivated and correctly reflected. The questions from Ms. Masetti in terms of legal questions, I'll hand over to Advocate Turner.
Thank you, Ms. Masetti. In broad, yes, you are correct. That if the approach that we've adopted is taken up by NERSA and applied correctly, you will address the Section 21 concerns along the same lines as the Section 28 concerns. So if the approach is adopted correctly in Section 28, you will not run into problems in Section 21. There is one thing as a matter of definition that I just want to highlight, and that's this. Section 21 says you may not discriminate unless there are certain things happening. But you've got to define discrimination. That's actual discrimination. So in other words, you can actually discriminate. It doesn't say you can differentiate. And that's where I think the confusion has arisen. There is this belief that if there are different tariffs charged, it's automatically discrimination. And the Supreme Court of Appeal has said that is not correct. Differentiation, where there are proper grounds to do so, is not discrimination. So you don't even get into Section 21. The FCA has said, in fact, if you charge the same tariff for very different services and things, then you are in fact discriminating, even though you are charging the same tariff. And so that is the critical difference that we've highlighted and said, when you look at the COP and the MPP, they are obviously very, very different. And so you cannot charge the same tariff. And the only question now is, how different should those tariffs be and why? And that's the critical inquiry. And you will, if that is done correctly, you won't even need to look at Section 21. So just on the question of all factors and the affordability, and it came up in Ms. Massetti's question and in a later question from Mr. Sibanda. It's so important, and we've emphasized it in our submissions, that affordability is one factor. So if you were going to look only at cost, you would come out with unaffordable outcomes. If you look only at affordability, you're going to come out with unfair outcomes. And so you are required to look at all of them and weight them. And that's why we've said it's critical to recognize that there must be a difference between the two. And then you have then it's a question of how do you weight them and by how much. But if NOSA just applies a standard tariff because it says affordability is the criteria, it will be exactly where it is now. It will have produced an unfair, discriminatory tariff, and we wouldn't have solved the problem. And that's the critical element of the legal analysis.
The next question regards the interconnection of the various pipelines, and I think the way to possibly address it is to start with a crude oil pipeline. So the crude oil pipeline is an intermediate link, if one wants, between the offloading facility, what's called the single buoy mooring, the SBM in Durban. Crude oil is delivered to the SBM. It's then offloaded into intermediate tanks. The crude oil then goes into tanks that are owned by Tariff, which are at the old airport in Durban. And the SBM was a joint venture between a number of parties that currently and previously refine crude oil. From the Tariff facilities, which are the accumulation facilities for the crude oil, the crude is then delivered into this crude oil pipeline. It is transported up to the refinery in Tariff, and it's delivered into tanks at the refinery, and it then is processed, and refined products are distributed from the refinery. And at the moment, as we speak, there's no other product in that thing. As has been pointed out, there have been instances in the past where other products were transported in the crude oil pipeline. That, however, takes changes in the operation. It requires jump overs. If one wants to transport diesel in that pipeline, what is required is an intervention called a header, which is essentially a slug of product generally a solvent that can help clean up the product. That then is delivered to the refinery, and the diesel that was so transported has to then be reprocessed, at sometimes or recertified before it's fit for purpose to go into the market. So it's not a simple changeable thing that can happen at any time. The MPP is connected to various facilities in Durban. The main infrastructure there that enables connection into or delivery into that pipeline is currently called tight lining, in the absence of the terminal TM1 that needs to be constructed. Product is then delivered in large slugs to Jameson Park. And from Jameson Park, which is an aggregation facility belonging to Transnet, which is included in the regulatory asset base that is used for tariff setting, smaller slugs of product are then delivered to various places in the various delivery points in what's regarded as an order network. So from that point of view, I think it's clear that these things, these pipeline networks are segregated. They deal with different products. The after pipeline that we referred to earlier is a dedicated pipeline that goes from the Tariff refinery, where only refined, certified jet fuel is then transported from the Tariff refinery to the airport OTA. And just an additional point, jet fuel can be transported, and it is from time to time now, from Durban to Jameson Park in the multi-products pipeline. The capacity to do so is reasonably limited because of requirement, storage availability, and recertification things. So, I think the point we want to make is that there's not an ongoing, easy to operate standard interconnection between the crude oil pipeline and the multi-product or the refined product system. So, yeah, and I think that we can leave it there.
Then to deal with Mr. Sibanda's question around, do we accept that any change from the current approach would cause an increase in the overall tariff, the MPP tariff, and that MPP tariff would then be used by consumers? Yes, that's correct. If it were done just on cost, on incremental, we showed, I mean, the NERSA has calculated there'd be a massive cost to the consumer. In other words, if the cost of the service that the MPP service would use, if that was passed on to the consumer, it would be massive. Sasol is not proposing that. The Genesis report, paragraph 67, and in that area, there is a calculation done, and on the current values, or maybe it was last year's values, the impact on the consumer would be about 3 cents a litre. Now, no increase to consumers is a good thing, but when you talk about access to affordable products, when you see how the price changes, the petrol price changes, this is a tiny element of a 20-something rand petrol price. There'll be a 3 cents change. That is taken up in month-to-month changes in the petrol price as a result of many other things. And when we talk about access to, and we would emphasize this, the Act doesn't say affordable, it says access to affordable. And access is something that you need in the long term. And it would be very short-sighted of NERSA, with the greatest of respect, to say we're not going to apply a 3 cents increase and thereby put in jeopardy long-term security of supply. And so the consumer has an interest on long-term security of supply. Just one other thing, Mr. Sibanda, if the crude oil pipeline wasn't used for crude oil to Natref, and we were just bringing, in other words, Natref closed down, and we were just bringing imported product, first we would have lost industry, we would have had massive implications for the community of Sasolburg. But aside from that, the consumer in Johannesburg would be paying this increased price because they wouldn't have the cross-subsidization which they currently have from Sasolburg, from Natref, and from the crude oil pipeline. So you need to, that 3 cent change is actually a very, very small price for the consumer to pay when you look at the alternative. So there was a, and sorry, in dealing with fairness, do we regard the submission as one that promotes fairness? Absolutely. The proposal is fair in all respects. It's fair to the consumer. It's fair to the operation of the pipelines. It still gives a massive subsidization to people bringing matters up the NPP. And it solves for that yield problem, because the way in which the question was put, it said, but you're ultimately delivering the same product at the end of the line. And that is correct. We're delivering petrol and diesel into the inland market. At the moment, Sasol is paying 11.5%, 12% more to do that, but it's not recovering that 11.5%, 12%. All Sasol is asking for is fair treatment so that the cost of delivering a litre of petrol in Joburg is the same cost as delivering a litre of petrol for the importer. At the moment, the suggestion is Sasol is getting some kind of benefit, and nothing could be further from the truth. At the moment, Sasol is fighting because it's being prejudiced, and it's looking to be treated fairly to resolve that prejudice. Advocate Sithole asked a question asked for clarity in relation to the interpretation of section 28 and the single methodology. If we understood the question correctly, yes, we believe that a single methodology can be applied, but of course a methodology gives principles. It doesn't regulate the detail. And so it will say, when you set tariffs, you must have regard to equivalence of services, equivalence of cost, and those factors that we've reached, and affordability and access to petroleum pipelines, and the kinds of things that you're looking for. And then when NERSA applies each one of them, it will recognize that there are differences, and it will allow for those differences without creating a significant problem for affordability. Some Mkhize's questions. Should I deal with the first one? Mr. Mkhize's first question was in relation to, are we against the rolled in? And then we say we're not. Hopefully the presentation and Sasol's documents explain the position. And just to re-emphasize, it's not an all or nothing approach. Rolled in merely looks at, we say correctly would be to look at the allowable revenue. So it's the simplest way to calculate allowable revenue. But having done that, you can't ignore the fact that there are other factors when you set tariffs to recover that revenue. And so it's not a question of it's either rolled in or it's incremental. It's applying the act and coming to a proper, reasonable, fair, non-discriminatory solution. In relation to the litigation, 10 years of litigation, it was what the 2011 decision did was it required Sasol to apply the variation agreement. If NERSA had made a decision and said we recognize the differential, then there wouldn't have been a need to apply the variation agreement as between the two companies. But the point is that the prejudice has always been there, and the prejudice is still there. And Sasol is looking to solve for the prejudice. I think this will come back in writing. Yeah. On the other questions, if we could, we will come back in writing. I've sort of lost track a little in taking the notes.
Maybe just next question. There was a question regarding the position of our partner, Sasol's partner in in NATREF, Prax, and their view on this. And on that, we cannot comment. We suggest that the regulator approaches Prax directly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would like to have just one follow-up question. I know you're still going to write. You may respond to it now or leave it, and include it as part of your responses in writing within the next 7 days. The concern is you when we're talking of the variation agreement vis-a-vis what we have in terms of the law being the Petroleum Pipelines Act, you seem to be asking for an equivalent of and the as-is situation, recognizing a discount that you will then get from Transnet pipeline that takes due regard of your differences or differentiating features. Am I understanding it correctly?
With the greatest of respect, no. And the very paradigm is incorrect. We are not talking about discounting. We are talking about taking into account the reality of costs, products, areas in the supply chain, those factors that are in Section 28(2). Those are the same economic realities that existed prior to the Act. All that happened with the variation agreement was that the parties then didn't have an act. They recognized the reality and they said, how do we solve for this reality? It's not a discount. It's recognizing the real difference between the one system and the other. And when that wasn't recognized by NERSA in 2011, Sasol had to fall back to an old agreement to impose on it. That agreement is terminated, but the reality is those differences still exist. It's not a question of discounting. And the Act says you must take them into account. So we respectfully suggest that there is a historical bias of historical arguments, and we heard it very, very clearly from Dr. Crompton this morning. There's this sort of fixed idea that there was a way to do it and we've got to carry on doing it. And we are desperately trying to convince NERSA that that's what the litigation's been about. And the correct way is to look forward and apply the Act and not talk about discounting and historical debates.
Okay, I would then appeal that in your submissions augmenting this, let's try by all means not to conflate the two issues. One of the variation agreement and equivalent of a discount vis-a-vis the methodology itself and the approach to the methodology. I think that is important, that separation, so that there's no confusion around this. What you are saying could be equivalent, but let's make sure that there is no confusion. Please do then provide and augment your submission, and I would request that in doing that to all the presenters, when you're advancing an argument, please do consider the counter argument to that. And I would also say that since we're looking at a system here that starts upstream, downstream to the end user, please do assist by thinking through the response, so that we look at the whole value chain and not just limit ourselves to a segment of the value chain, which then talks to the issues of a broader interconnectivity. With that, I would like to say thank you from your side. We are done with your presentation, and we appreciate it. Yeah, now we're moving to closure. I would like first of all to thank the members of the panel that have availed themselves to ensure that who have availed themselves to to this session. And most importantly, to thank the presenters to take your time. And also, I must say that to present also on a private capacity, I consider it to be a way of making a contribution, and I normally take it as patriotism in action. So that is appreciated, Dr. Crompton. It's also appreciated, Mwelase, Mr. Mazibugo. We appreciate you coming in, and we believe that you are going to keep your promise of augmenting what you have put forth today within this next 7 days. The same goes to you, Sasol. We appreciate you being upfront to discuss these matters in this platform. And we take it that you are going to provide us with the input. And I must also thank the technical teams that are working on this, in the background, working on these documents, looking at the nitty-gritties. And I'm looking forward then to further engagements also by the technical teams that are involved in all these, the work in the background. So from my side, I also want to thank you for your cooperation. We don't have the monopoly of wisdom. Hence, as a regulator, we will continue to have this kind of platform to make sure that our decisions are actually enriched. Once again, thank you very much. This public hearing stands at end. Thank you.